Our story begins with the preparation of a delicious breakfast. A girl chops vegetables with a smile, and then tastes her dish. And the result is quite good. It's time to wake up. The girl quietly approached her husband. She woke him up with a warning that he might be late for work. The daughter's next word finally brought results. The man woke up and abruptly realized that he had plans and no more time to sleep. He scratched his head awkwardly and agreed with his daughter. She suggested he go eat breakfast. 2 months ago, this man had such a beautiful daughter. 10 years ago, rifts started appearing on the earth. People were shocked to see that thing. They ran away from such rifts in fear, because monsters were coming out of them in unimaginable numbers, and an ordinary person is not strong enough to deal with such a threat. However, some people of different ages and genders began to develop strange skills. They are called hunters, and they fearlessly engage in battle with monsters that threaten the existence of humanity. Each of these hunters could see and adjust their abilities in the status window, which was very similar to the game interface. They drew conclusions according to their own power status and made decisions about fighting the intruders. By the way, Lee Dojun was a normal, non-awakened citizen who, after 3 years of studying to become a worker for the government, finally got a job as a desk worker for the Rift management team at City Hall. Unfortunately, he was pretty clumsy, and his boss often blamed him for his poor performance. However, after a year of hard work, Lee was able to get his first serious assignment. He was overwhelmed with expectations from his first serious case. After his job, he went to the Gangdong district to see if a rift had appeared. But on the way, something unexpected and unplanned happened. He was hit by a truck. After this event, the guy could not regain consciousness. When he opened his eyes, he saw unfamiliar surroundings, and he found himself in the world of Miriam. This place was full of violence and love for martial arts. Although Dojun had died countless times in this world, he was able to relive each and every time. This was because he received a skill when he first woke up in Miriam. If he died, he would wake up a day before. Through this pocket watch skill, he turned back time again and again. So over time, he was able to get his results and improve his skills. And through all that, right when he was about to forget his own name, Lee Dojun became the strongest. The people of Miriam called Dojun a heaven's demon. Even though he conquered the central plain, there was nothing left for him. And just like that, just as he had appeared in a world called Miriam, he suddenly came back to his original reality. He was in the hospital and surprised the doctors with his behavior. He had not yet completed his full treatment. The staff of the hospital knew what had happened to him. The 17-year-old boy was hit by a cargo truck and then went through a 17-hour surgery. The boy did not remember the Korea he lived in very well. It would take him a long time to adapt to living in reality. But after living in Miriam, he became so strong that he is unlikely to work in such a humiliating job again. Now his level and characteristics are at their maximum, and he has many new, extremely strong abilities. After familiarizing himself with his interface, the guy remembered that he actually had a lot of blood on his hands. Constant battles with traitors in the world where he got to brought him to a state in which he could not trust anyone. It's all the result of an infinite number of deaths and rebirths of the guy. So this time, he wants to live a normal, peaceful life without such violence. The guy visited his workplace in Seoul City Hall. All the employees were shocked by his sudden visit. They were concerned about the health of the guy who was recently hit by a cargo truck. To their surprise, he replied that nothing serious had happened to him. No one understood what was happening because his appearance was really not different from the usual. His boss said that the guy started talking with a different tone of voice. But Lee said he did not understand what was going on. In addition, Dojun's body became noticeably stronger in a short time, whereas before he looked quite weak and clumsy. In addition, the boss noticed that the guy's height had changed significantly. He thought that a completely different person had come to them. The guy said that, despite all the noticeable changes, he was really Lee Do-jun, and then said that he still had some memory problems after the accident and asked where his workplace was. Folding his hands in front of him, the business boss said that it was very different from his old employee Lee Do-jun. The boss then asked Hyensu to bring a fingerprint scanner. Meanwhile, one of his co-workers was fascinated by Lee's new appearance. Hyensu brought the scanner and asked his colleague to prove that it was really him. Everyone looked at the result in amazement, and the identity of the Rift's employee was confirmed. The boss couldn't believe it and asked Lee Do-jun to repeat the test, but the result was always positive. He couldn't believe that his clumsy employee could change so much in one day. A colleague thought it might be a result of amnesia, and in her opinion, Lee became more attractive. The man asked how he could have changed his height then, but the girl didn't care anymore. Do-jun was exhausted by this dialogue and asked to see his workplace. The boss said he shouldn't work today and asked the employee to go home to get some rest. Lee was still on sick leave and had one more day off before returning to work. The intrusive boss offered to help him find his way out of the office, but he said he could do it on his own. Do-jun returned home. He still had doubts whether it was the right house. When he approached the door, he stopped. After a long stay in the marine world, he couldn't remember his own code. Suddenly, the door opened and an attractive girl came out of his apartment. She called Lee as her uncle, but he didn't know who she was. They continued their acquaintance in the kitchen and drank coffee. And it turned out that this girl was not a stranger, but the daughter of our hero's brother's girlfriend. His brother's girlfriend died in an accident, and in fact, Do-jun agreed to live with her. So he told her the code to the apartment, and she arrived at her new home today. The guy with amnesia asked if they had met before, but she replied that this was their first meeting. Lee realized that this was a big responsibility and asked if she had any other relatives. But the girl replied that her mother was an orphan and that she had no one else to turn to for help. Suddenly, the boy noticed food that he had not prepared, and the daughter said that it was Amaris. She had cooked it for dinner. Do-jun suddenly said that he would hardly be able to take her in for long. The girl did not understand why his intentions had changed so suddenly, so she showed him their correspondence. 2 days ago, the guy told her that this situation was not a problem for him, and that he would be happy to provide her with a place to stay. He told her about yesterday's accident and how he woke up in the hospital with amnesia. The girl did not know that such an event had happened to him. She asked how his health was, but to her surprise, he said that his body had fully recovered, but he still has memory problems, so it can lead to some difficulties in performing everyday tasks. Therefore, he is unlikely to be able to help her now, as he needs time to adapt. The girl was a bit confused by his words, but then she offered to sign a contract. The guy asked what she meant. The girl offered to become her father until she graduates from high school. Lee Do-jun was surprised by this sudden offer. She said that she was ready to help him adapt. She would do all the housework to make it easier for him. In exchange, she asked to be allowed to live with them in the apartment until she finished her studies. She needed at least 6 months before she could move into a dormitory. Do-jun realized that this was a very convenient and favorable offer for him. He had been in the Middle Ages for a long time and would not be able to live like he used to in modern Korea anytime soon, and he would always have someone there to help him. He realized that it was very beneficial for both of them. He agreed to sign a contract with her. He started writing the terms on a piece of paper and then handed it to the girl. He asked her if she understood everything and if she needed to make changes to certain clauses of the contract. The girl began to review what he had written. She had no questions about the terms of the contract. After that, the guy offered to sign it. The girl could not hold back her tears of happiness. Her name is Miss Yoon-hee, and they agreed to help each other throughout their lives in the family. Yoon-hee asked him with a smile if she could call him father, and Lee said that he didn't mind. They agreed to dispense with formalities in their conversations and live as if they had always known each other. The girl was confused by how quickly he got used to his new life. Suddenly, she went to his room to ask him something, and the boy's naked torso surprised and confused her. She turned away and apologized for entering the room without permission. Dojun asked her what she was interested in. She replied somewhat awkwardly that they had nothing in the fridge and should go to the store to buy something. Lee, of course, did not remember such details and took out a bank card from his wallet. He handed the card to his new daughter and told her that she could now pay for all her purchases herself. She was surprised by her father's action, and then suggested that he go with her to a local store to see if it would help him regain his memory. Dojun said that it could really help him and agreed to go to the store together. Yunhee said that she would cook him some fresh vegetables, which didn't bother Lee too much, as he was more worried about the high prices. She was pleased that she could be helpful to her new father, but their pleasant dialogue was distracted by the noise nearby. The girl realized what was happening. The guy saw a familiar sight. It turned out that a rift had appeared in the store, and the customers were very frightened. Suddenly, the girl started pulling out a gun. She warned her father that it could be dangerous and he should hide. The first monster came out of the rift, and the ordinary visitor was very frightened by the sight of a strong and big goblin. But Dojun was unaffected. Meanwhile, the first shots were fired. Yunhee started to fight the enemies. Her shot hit the goblin's sternum. Lee was not surprised at all, and continued to stand calmly holding the shopping bag. The goblin looked at his wound in fright, and said something incomprehensible. The freshly baked donut fell noisily to the floor. People gathered around him. One guy was already armed with a baseball bat. They thought they had been saved by one of the monster hunters. The guy did not even suspect that his daughter was actually a hunter. Hiding the gun, she asked her father why he didn't hide to a safe place. He still has memory problems, and could have been hurt in the battle. Dojun apologized and promised to be more careful in the future. The police arrived at the scene and found a single dead goblin, and then asked Dojun if he had killed the monster. But the boy replied that it was actually his daughter. The policeman was surprised that such a young lady was so strong and brave. He asked if she had an identity card and other important data, and that there would be a financial reward for her work. The police are paid to kill monsters and keep civilians alive and safe. The man said that the father of the underage girl could provide his own bank account for the reward. Dojun thought about it, and then asked the girl to provide her own bank account number. The girl was very happy to receive the reward. Due to unexpected events, they returned home quite late. It was evening and the girl started to prepare dinner, when suddenly she was distracted by a message on her cell phone. She was charged for her work as a hunter, and she was surprised that the amount was quite large. Dojun said that it was a great payment for one goblin, and then asked if it made sense for them to live together, since she could pay for her own housing with such an income. Yeonhee replied that it was a unique situation. No one promises that she will always be as lucky with rifts as she is today. In addition, only hunters with a license or related death angels can enter the rift, which is called a dungeon. The girl does not have such rights because she is an ordinary person. The boy asked if she had studied the laws of mind, but his daughter didn't understand, so he started to explain the term, but quickly changed his plan and said it didn't matter. The girl realized that she had made a great impression on her father, and said that in March she would enter the State Academy of Hunters. She hasn't awakened yet, but she can still use mana. By the way, Yeonhee is not an official hunter, but has a mana gun license, so she is allowed to carry around this type of weapon. The guy was surprised and said that not everyone can handle it, and the smiling girl replied that he should treat her well. She plans to become a very popular monster hunter. The girl cooked a lot of delicious dishes and invited her father to eat everything. During dinner, she asked Dojun what he did for a living. He told her that he was a government employee at the city hall. Yoonhee said she was worried if his job was dangerous. She was enjoying life with her new father. The next day, Lee Dojun went to the city hall. After a short vacation, he would have to return to work. He walked into the office and greeted his colleagues. His boss, still confused, asked him how he was feeling and if he was able to start work. Dojun replied that he was perfectly fine, leaning back in his chair and folding his hands in front of him. The man told Dojun that he should take care of his health and that he could always count on his colleagues to help him. He then pointed to his workplace. A colleague next to him offered his help. Everyone knew that Lee had memory problems after a recent accident. This guy's name is Kwon Hyuk-soo, and he is a senior. Dojun thanked him for taking care of him. One of the workers looked at his watch anxiously. They were waiting for a valuable monster hunter for them. He was given F rank. In fact, the value of most hunters is in numbers, not skills. The problem of rifts was getting more serious. Suddenly, a girl rushed into their office and apologized. The boss said it was no big deal and he should have come out to the meeting. The senior turned to Dojun and invited him to meet the new hunter. He didn't have much desire to go back to his girlfriend. A colleague pulled him up from his desk and offered to help him meet the girl. Usually their department searches for faults, so they go out on patrols in pairs with hunters. And so he would be working with Shea Yiji because she's actually a hunter. They started to get to know each other. However, the senior replied that this time they would not be able to work together. He looked a bit confused after saying that before explaining the situation in detail. He said that Dojun was having some memory problems and was unlikely to be able to handle the task, so he would replace him for the time being. Lee was not very happy to be considered unreliable. A colleague assured him that there was nothing wrong with that, but despite Dojun's good physical condition, no one knew if he could do such a responsible task. The office boss said that Dojun had injured his head, and with such amnesia, he should not continue his usual work in the office. Dojun was very surprised by the behavior of his colleagues. He had the impression that he was perceived as an unscrupulous employee. Despite the behavior of his colleagues, he refused their offer and assured them that he was capable of doing the job himself. The confused senior replied that he should not rush. The boss panicked and said that Dojun should rest after the accident and not take any risks, and that the hunter had an official contract and Hyuk-soo would be the best partner for him. Lee insisted that he would be the one to keep the company in eliminating the monsters and rifts, and his colleagues were running out of patience. Lee Dojun finally got his way and went on patrol. The boss was not happy with his colleague Hyuk-soo's decision, but he was going to give Lee another chance. The team got to work. Lee Dojun and a cute girl started patrolling. The guy had enough documents to understand the essence of his task. His part of the job is to research all the information about the rifts for specialists like him. Students from the Hunter Academy are provided with assistance. Unfortunately, many fake documents have appeared among the large mercenary guilds. Even government employees have started using them. Sha Yeji decided to get to know her partner better. She said that she was 21 years old and she was happy that they would work as a team. The guy replied that he was checking the documents and missed a certain part of her appeal, after which his attention was drawn to an unfamiliar object in the girl's hands. Yeji said that it was a case. It contained her uniform and weapons. These are the necessary things for fighting monsters. Their conversation was interrupted by the driver, who said they had arrived. The team got off outside the city. There was a forest around. The girl opened the case, and then took out a strange green ball. She held it to her body, and then the shape of a monster hunter appeared on it in an instant. The guy was very surprised by what he saw. He could not observe such technologies in the world of Mirim. The girl asked him with a smile if it was the first time he had seen it, and he replied that it was. She said that this suit has the lowest level of protection, but it is quite expensive, and her sword is a trophy. It belonged to one of the monsters. The girl asked her partner how to address him, but the guy didn't care. So Yeji-cha decided to call him manager, as he was responsible for rifts. The team passed the inspection and was allowed to approach the object. The team was confidently approaching their goal. There was a rather large rift in front of them. The girl was a little confused because it was the first time she went on a mission without other hunters. Suddenly she heard a familiar male voice. A team of 3 men greeted her. Their captain asked Yeji why she was still working as a hunter. The girl was confused and did not know how to answer him. This meeting was an unpleasant surprise for her. The hunter looked at Dojun and asked her if she had joined one of the guilds, and she didn't know how to answer. With a disdainful look, the man said that he was amazed that anyone accepted her since she couldn't even use mana. Yeji felt ashamed in front of her colleague and looked down. As the rude stranger continued to humiliate the girl, Dojun just watched. He asked the girl if she knew this hunter, and Yeji replied that they had attended courses together to become hunters. Their conversation was interrupted by the laughter of the man across the street. He was amused that the girl had decided to sign a contract with the city hall. He said that no guild would ever accept a weak fighter like her. No one wanted an F-ranked fighter. Dojun told the rude man that he should stop, and that his behavior was really pathetic. The arrogant man turned to his team and asked if they had also heard what the civil servant had said. He was angry at the guy's unfriendly tone. So he lifted Dojun in the air with one hand. Yeji immediately started to panic, thinking that her manager was in danger. The monster hunter asked Lee if he could protect his colleague, but the guy hadn't taken such threats seriously for a long time. Suddenly, the monster hunter was frightened. The guy threateningly said that he would forgive the rude man if he let him go within 3 seconds. Dojun's eyes looked very serious. The man let him go, after which he shouted in panic that he couldn't breathe. One of the hunters put his hand on Na Hanjong's shoulder and asked what happened. The frightened man fell to the ground and covered himself with his hand. His team was worried they did not understand what had happened. Hanjong pissed himself in fear. Yeji couldn't hide her own surprise, but the manager just smiled back at her, and then reached out to the frightened hunter and asked if he could stand on his own. Dojun's look was enough to cause the poor man to panic. With a threatening look, Lee warned the rude man that he should not interfere with them if he valued his life. Through tears and incredible fear, the man agreed. No one could understand what happened in those few seconds of contact. The Dojun manager suggested that the girl should not dwell on this situation and start her task as soon as possible. There was a rift next to him. Lee put his hand through it, and then the team safely passed to the other side of the portal. They examined the area around them. Yeji believes that this is a F-rated rift because the interior is pretty simple. The team observed a lone goblin nearby. Lee Dojun picked up the tablet and logged into the control system. He registered a new rift in Seoul, Gangdon District. The boy indicated the rift rank named by the girl. The system started creating a map of the area. They were ready to continue exploring, and the girl decided to go first. Yeji was worried about whether she could handle it. Lee noticed her mood changes. He is just a manager, and his responsibility is to research the information about the portal's terrain. While the girl was thinking that she should show her best for the sake of the contract with the mayor's office, they noticed a noise nearby. Other hunters have also joined the exploration of this rift. They have already managed to overcome several goblins. The boy was surprised that they were late, and Yeji was disappointed that she had missed a chance to show her friend her worth. The girl fell to the ground in frustration. But Lee Dojun was happy that the other soldiers had done all the dirty work, so they could quickly complete their own tasks and return home. In the meantime, he decided to review the girl's characteristics, and he was surprised to see that Yeji was no different from an ordinary person. However, she had one peculiarity. Her status window showed a passive swordsmanship skill of level 1 with S rank. He asked the girl if it was true, and a smile appeared on her face. She was really proud of such a rare skill. She was one of the best during the hunter's course. She said that she used to ace all the tests and win all the duels. But her victories didn't last long. She couldn't show off her skills well with no mana at all. She started to panic because she had no idea how to level up to level 3 and get access to mana. So she thought that no matter how hard she tried, she would not be able to achieve the desired result. Her panic was stopped by Dojun, who shouted the girl's name and picked her up off the ground. She was thinking so hard about her negative experience that she did not notice the enemy attack. And the stick of one of the monsters fell in her place. A group of goblins was approaching them. The guy pulled Yeji to her feet and told her that this was her chance to show her skills and improve her level, and that the battle would start soon, and the girl began to worry. The guy sent the confused girl forward to the enemies. She had no other choice. She had to get her head together and accept the fight. She approached the enemies, and then easily dodged the goblin's first attack. Yeji easily picked herself up off the ground and struck out, causing a cut to appear on the enemy's face. She took a fighting stance and struck again. The goblin could not stand still from such a strong kick. He flew back a few meters. The goblin thought that its resistance was over, but in a moment the skilled hunter was able to decapitate the enemy. The second monster watched in amazement at what had happened to his friend. The girl was pleased with the result of her work. She asked the manager if he had seen how she had easily defeated the goblin. But suddenly she noticed that the second enemy began to approach her friend, who did not even look up from his tablet. She was expecting the worst-case scenario. She didn't have time to save her colleague from the enemy. But Lee Dojun was not at all embarrassed by this event. He easily dodged the enemy attack. The girl was surprised by the speed of the reaction of an ordinary government employee. The goblin did not calculate his speed and fell to the ground, and then flew off the cliff behind Dojun with an animal scream. The guy continued to calmly read the information on the tablet, and the girl did not even expect him to be so strong. Without taking his eyes off the tablet, Dojun warned his colleague that she shouldn't be distracted from the battle, and it was time to focus on the enemy. Behind the confused girl stood a goblin, concerned about the hardship of being a goblin. The girl turned to the enemy. She barely managed to stop his attack. The enemy's attack was strong enough to open her up a few meters. She could barely stand on her feet. The guy asked her if she was really that exhausted after fighting only 2 goblins, and Yeji began to make excuses that she still had more to show for it. The goblin wasted no time in striking again, but she managed to jump back, and she kept her defense up. The enemy held his weapon and smiled sweetly at her. The girl was furious that the situation was getting worse. She gathered the rest of her strength and rushed into battle, but the goblin managed to strike first and she was unable to react in time. Lee noticed that his colleague's hands were shaking. He said that fencing was probably not her only strong skill. He thinks that the basis of her fighting style is to block the enemy's attack and strike with the least amount of force. Dojin suggested that she step back a bit and rest, as her breathing was very short, and she would not be able to continue the fight with shaking hands. The girl followed her friend's advice and took 2 steps back. She tried to calm her breathing. She should focus on the enemy. The goblin was also exhausted. He had no strength left for a long fight. Dojun, as a more experienced swordsman, advised Yeji to focus on attacking. Against such an exhausted opponent, it would be easy to find the right moment to strike with the sword. He said that it was better not to drag out the fight, but to gather the rest of the strength and launch a strong and unexpected attack. It was very important for her to catch the goblin in a mistake, as he had already started to panic and was not following the enemy's movements. Yeji was ready to demonstrate her rare fencing skills. She confidently took a stance. Ready to fight, she watched the enemy closely. The goblin swung his club high and opened his body for a counterattack. The girl did not hesitate to strike him a quick blow. Before the goblin could realize what had happened, The fight was already over. The girl's sword was on the enemy's neck. Yeji was able to cope with the task. This time, she was able to show her friend her fencing skills. The sun began to set in the world inside the rift. Dojin thanked the girl for her good work. He had collected enough information and suggested that they return home. Exhausted, Yeji lay on the ground. She wanted to rest a little more. She had managed to defeat 17 goblins, and with such success, she would be able to earn good money. She got up from the ground and said that the financial reward for her work was not the only incentive for her to continue. She wanted to join the team of monster hunters. Yeji told the manager that he must be hiding his true power. The guy pretended not to understand what she was talking about, and she started to remember his advice and the wonderful reaction. But the guy decided not to listen to her and just went home. The girl was offended and stood alone for a few more minutes. In the real world, evening also came. The manager was calmly returning home after a productive day. He was walking home, thinking about his adaptation in modern Korea, but he noticed that someone was following him. Lee Dojin stopped. He just wanted to go home, so he didn't want to play with the stalker for long. So he warned the stranger that he would get angry if he didn't show up in 10 seconds. He didn't have to wait long. Yeji came out to him, and he was surprised by this sudden and strange encounter. He asked the girl why she was following him. Yeji replied that Lee hadn't answered her question and she needed an answer. She wondered if he was hiding his true power. Turning away from her, the guy offered to come to his house for dinner. The girl was hungry and happily responded to such a generous offer. They reached Dojin's house. Yeji still felt insecure as she walked up the stairs. She said that she would probably go home, as she felt uncomfortable coming to visit so late. But the boyfriend said it was okay and that he had a delicious dinner waiting for them at his house. The girl was surprised because she thought he lived alone. But Dojin said that his daughter was responsible for cooking. Yeji was very confused by this answer. She couldn't believe that such a young man already had a fairly grown-up daughter. Lee warned his partner that they shouldn't talk about the events of that day during dinner, as his daughter thought he was just a government worker. The girl was uncomfortable entering the apartment, thinking that Dojun had just married early, and therefore already had an adult daughter. They were greeted by a smiling Yunhee, who was happy that her father had finally returned home. But behind the door she saw a panicked stranger. Yeji did not expect to see her colleague's daughter so grown up. She did not understand how this was possible, since the boy was only 26 years old. Concerned by the stranger's appearance, Yunhee asked her father who the woman was who came to visit them, and the boy replied that it was his colleague. Yeji still hesitantly greeted her and introduced herself as Dojin's colleague. Yunhee asked with suspicion if they were just colleagues, and the dialogue became a little awkward. Dojin explained that they just work in the same department at the city hall and asked to go home. The girl instantly changed her expression and gladly invited them inside her neatly cleaned house. Yeji was shocked at how clean her colleague's apartment was. The friendly Yunhee said with a polite smile that they were having dinner soon, so she suggested they have some tea and go home. Unexpectedly, her father said that Yeji was invited to dinner with them. Yunhee turned around and said that she would have to cook for Yeji. The boyfriend was surprised by her behavior and asked if it was because she was going through a transition, and she nervously shouted that everything was fine. Yeji was surprised by the behavior of her colleague's family. Yunhee looked offended. Dojin's colleague had a hunch. Everyone had dinner. Yeji praised the girl for the delicious food and asked her where she learned to cook so well. But the girl replied that she had bought all the dishes in the supermarket. During the conversation, the daughter was distracted. She noticed a familiar case and asked whose it was. Yeji happily replied that she was a low-ranking hunter. She used the case to transport her weapons and costume. But after giving such details, she realized that she had said too much. She looked back at her colleague's reaction. Yeji regretted her recklessness and told her friend's daughter the secret. Yunhee was surprised that the hunter was a colleague of an ordinary city hall employee. But her father said that it was not her main job, and she was an illegal hunter, so she could get a fine, and it should be kept secret. The girl got up from the table loudly. No one knew what was going to happen. But Yunhee suddenly took Yeji's hands with enthusiasm and said that it was amazing, and she wanted to become a hunter too. Yunhee showed her application form and said that she was going to enter the Monster Hunter Academy. Such an incredible reaction was unusual for Yeji. She began to make excuses that she did not deserve the praise, because she had the lowest rank. But Yunhee, who was happy, assured her that it didn't matter. The main thing was that she was a real hunter. The girl continued to ask a lot of questions about the specifics of her job and the peculiarities of combat, and Lee was exhausted by the girl's conversation. They continued for several hours, but when it was time to say goodbye, Yeji thanked them for dinner. Yunhee said she had fun spending time with her. Yeji said that they would meet again next time. But her daughter said that she shouldn't, because she still doesn't like Yeji. This ambiguous behavior worried the hunter. Dojin told his daughter to go home and he would walk his colleague to the subway. A somewhat dissatisfied Yunhee agreed with his decision. After a short silence, she started talking. She asked Dojun if she was his own daughter, a question that confused him. He asked what they were talking about. Yeji replied that they have a big age difference, and there are no family photos at home, and Lee doesn't wear a ring. In addition, they have different surnames, so they are not father and daughter, and in her opinion, Lee has never been married. The confused boyfriend called her words inappropriate jokes. The girl dialed the police and asked if their relationship was legal, and the guy replied that there was nothing illegal about it. He admitted that Yunhee was actually his niece. His brother had problems, so he was taking care of her himself. The girl was confused by her colleague's answer. She regretted asking so many questions and apologized, and Dojin asked her not to bring up this family history at work again. After an uncomfortable conversation, the colleague said goodbye. The girl looked in the direction of the boy. She had new questions, because in this case, the colleague and his brother also had different surnames. These thoughts were on her mind. But she decided that she should forget about it and go home and get some rest. The next day at the mayor's office began with the surprise of the entire office. The boss couldn't believe that his clumsy employee had managed to get the job done in one day. He asked the man if he had any problems with the results of the task. The man replied that in fact everything was done perfectly, and he couldn't even believe that Dojin had done it all by himself. Usually it takes at least several months to get this much data. The man turned to Hyuksu and asked with disbelief if he had helped his colleague, but the senior replied that he himself was very surprised by Lee's results. The man smiled and praised his colleague, saying that he could not have done that much work himself. Dojun accepted his colleague's praise with a smile. Sha Yeji was surprised by the reaction of the office staff and asked her friend if he was their best employee. The guy didn't understand what she was doing at the office and said that she could relax on her day off. Yeji replied that she was just passing by and decided to stop by. She doesn't expect to be paid for being at work on her day off. Senior handed the manager a document. The guy didn't know what it was. Hyuksu replied that it was a hunter exam schedule, and he, as the girl's manager, should know about it. The exam to assess the level of hunters' skills is held once a year. Depending on the results, participants can improve or worsen their position. So it is a very important day for every hunter. In Korea alone, there are several hundred hunter guilds, all of which are interested in high-level specialists. It is during this period that guilds choose new members the most, so the day of the rating evaluation exam is also called the opening day of the transfer market. Hyuksu said that their boss is very worried about the results of this day. Lee realized that after the hunter's own rank was increased, they chose to work in private guilds and left the government jobs. Among their employees, Chae Yeji will also take part in the certification, and Dojun should go to the exam with her. The girl will be performing in the first group in a week. Lee Dojun asked his colleague if she was also planning to join the guild, but the girl started to panic and said that she was planning to extend her contract with them. Lee replied that it was not really his business, and she should ask the office manager, and the girl just smiled at his reaction. The manager told his colleague that it would be better to raise her level before the performance appraisal, and that she would be able to earn a higher salary. The girl replied that she would get an F rating again anyway, and the guy looked at her in surprise. Yeji said that the reason was that she did not know how to use mana, and the certification itself was divided into several stages, namely level determination, stat changes, and practical evaluation, and the result of the exam itself depends on the total number of points scored. However, the most important thing is the amount of mana a hunter has. With the help of a mana crystal, fighters can become much stronger. This is called mana injection. But Cha Yeji has never been able to achieve this. He realized that she couldn't even count on E rank now. Dojun suggested to the upset girl to make an effort and try again. He didn't want to keep doing a boring job. He works with only one hunter, and it is Yeji, so he hopes that she will improve her level, and they will be able to work on more interesting locations. The girl said that was true, but she was afraid that the manager would find a better hunter. Dojun pretended not to get the hint and thought about putting out an ad looking for a new partner. But unexpectedly, Yeji said that she was his only assistant at the moment, and he asked her to make an effort to do well in the future. The team went to the training room for hunters. This place used to be called the office for working with old riffs. However, now it is a training room, and in fact Dojun visited it for the first time. The walls inside are quite reliable. They are resistant to impacts as they are made of special material from the Hunter's Academy. The guy remembered the girl's story about her lack of mana. He asked her if she had ever exercised, and she replied that she could not get mana until she reached level 3, so she felt like a complete failure. The boy asked if she could show off her swordsmanship skills, and Yeji replied that she had some notes on it, and she handed him a notebook. Dojun was surprised by the number of thoughts she had written down. Yeji was describing all the things she couldn't understand, and she was drawing various fighting techniques. The boy looked at the notebook thoughtfully. Despite his colleague's poor drawing skills, he recognized the three-way fencing method. The boy explained to the girl that fencing is a technique based on the three-way method. Jin So-woon was the actual sword saint. He was a royal scholar who suddenly appeared like a passing comet. He won a Bimu duel against the current strongest warrior underneath the heavens, then disappeared without a trace. So Woon was able to reinterpret the current understanding of the three entities of sword arts, and was a genius among geniuses. He called that sword form scholar's swordsmanship, and a legend says that he left that sword arts to the warrior that he had defeated before disappearing. Dojun was fascinated by this story. He turned to his colleague and put his hands on her shoulders and said that she was an extremely lucky person and that people like her were hard to find. The girl did not understand what was being said and just looked at Lee in confusion. It was approaching 6 o'clock in the afternoon. The boss was watching with a smile. He was looking forward to the end of the day. As soon as it happened, Lee Do-jun said goodbye to the boss and said he was going home. A moment later, Yeji the hunter said goodbye and ran after her friend. Surprised colleagues have been observing a similar situation for several days. As soon as 6 o'clock starts, these two immediately run home. Hyuksu suspected that they are not just friends. He wondered it does seem that the girl is actually interested. He thought that only a fool could not notice it. With a sly smile, the office manager said that in his opinion, Lee Do-jun didn't even suspect anything. Meanwhile, the girl was practicing fencing diligently. She practiced her sword style to improve her skill level. Her movements became more skillful. She tried to achieve better results. The girl stopped for a moment. She began to feel a change. She thought it was a sense of her own mana being present. She looked at her status interface, and then noticed that her current level had increased. Yeji could not contain her joy. Dojun praised her for her hard work, and said that this was a great result achieved in just 1 week. The girl thanked the manager with enthusiasm and said that their meeting was a real miracle. Dojun raised his head high and agreed. He said he would take this into account when he renewed their joint contract. The girl agreed with him with a sincere smile. Yeji said that her guesses were right. Her partner was indeed hiding his true strength. The guy sighed heavily. He decided not to continue this conversation once again and said goodbye. They would meet again tomorrow in more interesting conditions. The next day at the Hunter Academy. At the entrance, there were a lot of people who wanted to be certified. A guy asked her if it was her first time here, and Yeji replied that she had taken the exam for a hunter's license here, but hadn't taken any more tests since. The manager complimented her on her productive desires and wished her good luck with her recertification. Suddenly, they were distracted by the surprise of the crowd. They saw a local celebrity. His name was Kang Minhyuk. Next to him was Han Minji. They are 2 big-shot S-rank hunters. Everyone who wanted to be certified stepped back from the track and watched the celebrities with admiration. The girl smiled and thanked her coworkers for their courtesy. Kang showed no emotion. Lee surprised his colleague by saying that he did not know about these hunters. The girl explained that they are ranked 7th and 10th from the Icarus Guild. They are among the handful of the strongest hunters in the world. The boy looked in their direction thoughtfully. He thought that their fame was actually overrated. Dojun turned to the girl and told her that, with her talents, she could catch up with them in a year of hard training, and a surprised smile appeared on the faces of the people around them. They started laughing at the guy's words, and Yeji replied that it was impossible to reach S rank so quickly, and he was just talking nonsense. She covered her face in shame and asked her manager not to say such things in front of other hunters. Kang Minhyuk was unhappy that they had to be in such a place for the sake of their company's business development, and his colleague said that he should watch his emotions, as there were many cameras around them. Han Minji's words annoyed the guy, but he agreed. The girl said that such work is more interesting than fighting weak monsters on boring missions. Minji said with a smile that she expects a new genius to appear during the exam. The guy indignantly replied that he hears this every year, so he asked his partner to hurry up. They had to select the best fighters for their guild. Among the crowd there were also hunters we knew. The brute from the last mission arrogantly said that Han Minji was waiting for him. He was looking forward to the test to show his strength. But despite the leader's confidence, his colleagues still taunted him about the past events and asked if he had brought a spare pair of pants. As the first stage began, the exam administrator announced the statistics and invited the hunters to enter the room one by one. Lee told the girl that it was her time, and Che agreed with her colleague with a smile on her face. Han Jung looked forward with confidence. He believed that he would easily get into one of the strongest guilds. The hunters lined up to count the statistics. Everyone was excited to see the results. Some hunters had already gotten good results. Their expectations were met, and they could not contain their joy. Managers of the best guilds offered to join their team. A man with rank C could choose where to join. The personal manager of the Balkan Guild was telling all the advantages of his organization, while his competitors were trying to show off their best side. Yeji barely managed to get through the crowd and return to her colleague, and Lee asked about the result of the stage. The happy girl said she got D rank. She was very happy with the results of her training. Her mana not only appeared, but also increased by 10 levels. The guy replied with a smile that he congratulated her, and then suggested that she go on. They were watching one of the C-ranked hunters. Yeji would be the next to compete in the duel. The excited girl asked the manager if she would really be able to test her skills against a C-ranked opponent. Lee thoughtfully replied that she could easily defeat a monster of the same rank now. Confused, Yeji asked the manager how he could be so sure. Dojun looked mysteriously and replied that it was his intuition. Throughout the building of the hunting academy, the opening of access to Rift for the third group of Rank C was announced. Lee Dojun supported his partner. The girl could not calm down in anticipation of the battle. She had never fought such strong monsters before. Besides, a huge number of people were watching her, which only made her worries worse. Suddenly, a low male voice distracted her from her deep thoughts. Hanjong asked her what she had forgotten at this exam, and Yuji recognized her former colleague. She tried to think of an answer in confusion. She was embarrassed to meet this man after the events of the last mission. Hanjong angrily asked if she was here to test her strength. He said she must be crazy. Confused, Yeji apologized to the hunter. The arrogant man said that it was ridiculous. He didn't expect to see an F-ranked fighter in a test with C-ranked monsters. Everyone around them heard this conversation and turned around in surprise. They couldn't believe that the lowest-ranked hunter had decided to join such a difficult battle. Their eyes converged on the low-ranking girl in the cheap suit, and they began to discuss her illogical behavior. Folding his hands in front of him, Hanjong said that he did not know how to describe this nonsense. He suddenly felt a familiar fear. The frightened boy started looking around in search of his offender. Dojin guessed that this hunter hadn't brought a spare pair of pants, so he decided not to greet his friend and just watched in silence. Suddenly, a man approached him and spoke to Dojun. Kang Min-hyuk knew everything about him and his colleague Yeji. Lee Dojung replied that he wasn't even surprised by such detailed information. He continued to look at the hunter, waiting for his next move. Kang said that he didn't want to waste time, so he would get to the point of the conversation right away. His guild is interested in a contract with Yeji, he said. Yeji was able to gay body strengthening just once, and that was when she was at level 1, when she was taking her hunter's license test with an F-ranked magic stone. Through that body strengthening, she was able to inject herself and increase her mana to level 10. But there have been no record of her strengthening herself after that, which means she has monstrous talent. Dojun actually knew that the girl still hadn't used mana injection. Kang said that in the Icarus Guild, she will be able to get wings and an A-rank suit right away. She will also be able to gain insight through her senior hunters and be able to participate in higher-ranked rifts by doing raids, which will help her to increase her experience. On the other hand, the city hall will not be able to offer her better conditions. Kang believed that the salary increase was not enough for such a hunter. Besides, in his opinion, the manager made a mistake when he immediately sent a girl with no experience of fighting in rifts above D rank to a difficult exam. Min-hyuk said that it was a foolish move and they relied only on luck. Meanwhile, the rift was activated. The task of the fighters was to destroy the enemy orcs in a certain time. The enemies were much better armed than the goblins Yeji had fought before. Hanjong finally got his chance to prove himself. Sha Yeji was ready to fight. Meanwhile, Kang continued to talk about the benefits of the guild. In his opinion, a hunter can only be trained by another, more experienced hunter, so Yeji should leave the city hall. Min-hyuk said that this is the best option for her and Lee Dojun should agree with him. The manager scratched his head thoughtfully, and then replied that Yeji has her own will and she will make her own decisions. With a sly smile, Dojun suddenly offered his opponent a bet. Kang couldn't understand what this fool from the mayor's office wanted to offer one of the best hunters on the planet. Meanwhile, the monsters were getting closer. Hanjung asked the distraught girl to pull herself together. The battle is about to begin. The formerly confident man began to doubt that he should have taken on such a difficult challenge. One of the orcs approached him and took a swing. It was much bigger than the hunter. The monster struck a heavy blow. Hanjung was shocked by the strength of the enemy. He thought he was dead. Filled with fear, the man thought he couldn't do it. His foolish thoughts were stopped by the monster's punch right in his face. Han Zhong fell to the ground. He dropped his weapon. The hammer was a few meters away from the fighter. However, the orc did not wait for the man to get up and came up to strike with both hands. The panicked man began to beg the monster to stop, when suddenly a girl appeared epically next to him. But the clumsy Yiji managed to fall right next to the enemy. The confused man did not understand what she was up to. Sha Yeji asked her former colleague to retreat. She would deal with the enemy herself. With a surprised look, Han Zhong said that her words were nonsense. The orc was not interested in talking and continued the fight. His new opponent was able to easily dodge the first blow. The girl showed much better speed. She managed to track the enemy's line of attack. This gave her confidence that she had a chance to win. The girl was behind the huge, clumsy orc with incredible speed, and then struck a series of blows on his back. The monster barely had time to react and blindly stabbed himself in the back. But he was not expecting what happened next. Yeji jumped up and stood over the enemy. Once in the right position, she demonstrated the first move of the school of fencing, a kick called Heaven, which went through the orc's entire body. She easily defeated the C-rank enemy with only one move. Everyone around her was extremely surprised. No one understood how an F-ranked hunter could resist a C-ranked monster. Dojin just smiled in satisfaction. Meanwhile, Kang couldn't believe his eyes and shouted that it was impossible. The girl's manager calmly asked the hunter why he was surprised by such an ordinary victory of his colleague. Kang Min-hyuk's face was covered with cold sweat. In general, there are 3 ways to use mana. The first is to put mana into the weapon. The second option is to emit mana. The third is mana replacement. In fact, putting mana into a weapon is not difficult. The main thing is to learn how to control the process. Kang didn't look so confident anymore. He said in a disheartened tone that Yeji was using a similar technique with unexpected ease. The exam was declared over. The administration asked the fighters to leave the hall, and the hunters supported each other and praised each other for their efforts. Meanwhile, Han Zhong stood there and couldn't understand what had happened. He squinted and looked at the scorecard. He was in last place without destroying a single enemy. Meanwhile, Yeji defeated 8 orcs and took first place. She met with her manager and thanked him for his help with training. One of the strongest hunters in the world interrupted the conversation between the friends. He came up to Sho and said that it was a very worthy battle. The shy girl said that for a fighter like Kang Min-hyuk, it was just child's play. The hunter noticed the girl's excellent technique and asked if she had a teacher. The girl wanted to point to her manager, but Dojin interrupted her and said that Yeji was training herself. She started to panic and Kang asked if it was true. Yeji was upset and confirmed her friend's words. The S-ranked hunter addressed Miss Sha Yeji with respect, and then said that he wanted to get straight to the point and invited her to join the Icarus Guild. He said that if she agreed, she would receive everything she needed. Their guild was one of the strongest, so it would create the necessary conditions for the girl's further growth. However, Yeji responded with a sincere smile and said that she was grateful, but not interested in joining their guild, and then asked the manager if he agreed with her. Confused by the unexpected answer, the man began to panic and ask her to think about the offer again, as she might not get such an incredible opportunity again. He said that the pay would be much better than the city hall salary, and the conditions and support of the Icarus Guild were among the best. Yeji looked away and said that she was already happy with everything and didn't want to leave the city hall. She felt uncomfortable in the company of the confused hunter and said goodbye to him. Returning to the hunter, Dojun asked him to call her. The man didn't understand what she was talking about at first, but then he smiled and looked away. The fact is that the cunning Dojun made a bet with Kang Min-hyuk. He believed that the girl would be able to overcome at least 5 orcs and in case of defeat, he would convince Yeji to join the Icarus Guild. However, if he won, he would get an A-ranked suit. Kang could not refuse such a lucrative offer. Meanwhile, our heroes returned to the city hall. Yeji was a little upset by the support of her colleagues. She was holding a hunter's license with rank C. The head of the office clapped his hands. The men could not believe that the girl could improve her level on the exam so much. Hyuksu asked her if she was okay. There had already been an article published about her. It said that the Icarus Guild had refused her request to be hired, that Kang Min-hyuk's popularity spoke for itself, and that Yeji was just a one-time celebrity. Hyuksu was surprised by the decision of one of the best guilds. The office chief decided to keep the conversation going, and said that their city hall is also one of the best in the world. The senior manager continued his thoughts out loud. If he were the girl, he would not miss the opportunity to join Icarus. The boss agreed, and said that they would also keep the girl in the lunch and provide her with everything she needs. The senior continued to talk about how Yeji had a great chance for a bright future. But the chief did not understand why he kept talking about it, and did not tell her about the benefits of working at the city hall. The girl had heard enough of her colleagues' praise, and then she asked the manager if he would treat her better now. Dojin replied with a smile that she had done the right thing and would not regret her choice. The smiling girl said that this answer was enough for her as a reward. The cunning boss watched the dialogue between the employees and gestured to the love between them. Turning away from his colleagues, Lee Dojin said that he and Hunter Yeji would go to the general store and then they would be back. By the way, the Korean General Store is the largest hunting equipment store that is located in the Hunter's Bureau. They sell suits, weapons, and even consumables that are necessary for hunters. Hyuksu said in confusion that he understood Dojin's concern, but their office budget does not provide for the purchase of equipment for hunters. At the moment, all funds are distributed among other hunters, and Yeji will be able to get the money only after agreeing on an additional budget. Despite the serious conversation, the boss continued to joke. The guy calmed his colleague down and said that they would not spend the office's money. They would just get the promised equipment. The team went to the hunting bureau. Dojin didn't even expect the sales area to be so simple. Yeji said that she had already been here and that there would be stores with branded items. They looked around for new gear. The selection was amazingly diverse. A woman with a sincere smile greeted the visitors. Lee Dojin introduced himself as an employee of the Rift's investigation department and said that he came at the request of Kang Min-hyuk. The woman replied that she had heard about it, and then offered to look through the assortment, and she would be around to help. Some of the costumes looked quite ridiculous. Yeji said that she still hadn't seen a costume that suited her. Suddenly she stopped. Her eyes sparkled happily. She called the manager and said that she had found an incredible costume with silver wings. Yeji heard that this suit is actually awesome. Apparently, it is made with the wings from the queen ant monster. The guy was surprised to ask if it was really what she wanted. The girl looked at the suit in love and said it was too expensive for her. They decided to continue their search. Exhausted, Lee Dojin regretted that he had agreed to this trip to the store. They spent 4 hours here, and still came back to that black suit with silver wings. The girl's emotions were very different, and she was talking with enthusiasm about how cool the equipment they bought was. The guy looked at the sign next to him in surprise. It read about a big sale of weapons with a 50% discount. Dojin asked the seller what kind of equipment it was, and the seller replied that it was a sale of E-rank items, and there were some pretty nice ones. The man offered a discount for buying several items at once, with one item selling for 1 million won. Kang was shocked by the price. He thought that the sale meant affordable prices, but the girl explained that hunting equipment is always expensive. The seller started to convince them that it was a very good deal, but Lee turned his back on him and told Yeji that they were going back to the office. At one point, however, he had sensed something among all the junk that was very interesting to him. He went back to the store and started looking for the item he needed among the sale items. Yeji didn't understand why the manager was acting so strangely. He finally found the item he was looking for. He couldn't believe that it was in such a place. He didn't believe that there is any chance that something that is supposed to be sealed in the heavenly demon god sect from the central plane was actually here. Picking up the item, the guy marveled at the sword of a world-ruling master. It was on sale for only 50,000 won. The seller immediately began to apologize for putting it on sale. He said that he even forgot to remove the price tag from the junk. Lee asked if this sword could really be bought for that price. The man slyly rubbed his hands together and said that such junk rarely makes it to the counter, but he could sell it. And the confused Yeji did not believe that her manager would agree to such a ridiculous purchase. Despite the reaction of the misunderstood girl, the guy was quite serious about his intentions. The confused seller was incredibly eager to sell this unnecessary product, but still asked why the buyer wanted to buy an old iron sword hilt. But Dojin assured him that it didn't matter. After the extremely successful purchase, Lee went to Mount Womyun, holding the same sword in his hand, and smilingly marveled at the fact that it was really valued at 50,000 won. Taking the object in one hand, the sword awakened. It released so much energy that everything around it flew apart, an extremely powerful force spreading all around the deserted forest. Suddenly, the man remembered that his daughter was already preparing dinner. It was getting late, and he didn't have time to take the subway, so he decided to use his powers. When he got home, Dojin apologized for being late, but in the meantime, he heard the news in the apartment. The man did not understand why Yunhee left the apartment and did not turn off the TV the news was telling about an incident near Mount Womyun, where a huge rift appeared and immediately disappeared. The guy was surprised by the information he heard. Meanwhile, the girl was in her apartment in her room, and because of the move, she completely forgot to pay the equipment rental, lecture fees, and other bills. She was shocked to find out that the public university had billed them more than 50 million won. Looking at the sky-high amount, she thought of asking her father for help, but financial support was not provided for in their family contract. She put her hand to her head and exhaustedly said that she should be grateful for the permission to live in Dojin's apartment. She was ashamed to ask for money for her studies. Lee came in and asked the frightened girl what she was doing. Yunhee panicked and covered the receipts with her hand and said that she was just cleaning the table. Dojin simply suggested that his daughter go to the kitchen and have dinner. The worried girl replied that she had no appetite and would join them later. She was embarrassed in front of her father and began to make excuses that she just needed to clean her room. Dojin realized that she was hiding something, but went to the kitchen. He asked his daughter if they had any sesame oil at home, and Yunhee said that it was in the bottom drawer under the oven. She didn't understand why he needed the oil, and the man shouted from the kitchen that he wanted to mix it with rice. Yunhee was unhappy with this barbarism and asked to eat her dinner, as she had prepared it. The girl hid her receipts and went to the kitchen to cook an egg for her contractor father. Dojin's plan worked, and he was able to break into Yunhee's room. He found the disturbing check and started counting the zeros. Realizing it was 50 million won, the shocked man couldn't say anything. Night fell. Dojin tried to sleep, but he couldn't get his mind off the troubling thoughts. The entrance fee to the Hunter Academy was 50 million won. He couldn't even imagine what the price would be after 3 years of training. He decided to get up and pick up his phone. Checking his bank account, he realized that he didn't have anywhere near the required amount. The equipment and training cost a lot. Lee finally understood why Miss Yeji was constantly collecting monocrystals. After some thought, he decided to call a colleague. But when he remembered what time it was, he began to worry if it was too late. But Yeji had already taken the unexpected call and asked her manager if everything was okay. The guy replied that she should sleep at this time because otherwise she would not have the energy to work. Sha Yeji had been sleeping for a long time, but she didn't know what to say to the manager and simply apologized. Dojin said that he was calling about an A-rank mana crystal. He was wondering how much such an item costs, and she replied that she didn't know exactly and that prices depend on the size. But she had heard that one crystal can get about 150 million won. Such an incredible amount surprised the guy with amnesia. That's what he wanted to hear. Yeji started to apologize and thank him for his concern. She said it was too early for her to think about a rank crystals, as she had just gotten C rank. But the guy didn't understand what she was talking about. He didn't even plan to worry about the girl because he only asked because of his own intention to help his daughter. But after collecting his thoughts, he calmly thanked her for her help and wished her a good rest. The girl sincerely thanked the manager for his support and the purchase of such a beautiful suit. She went to bed again, satisfied with her life. The next morning came. Dojin dressed to hide his identity, thinking that glasses, a mask, and gloves would be enough. He also had a fake temporary pass of a hunter named Kim Hyun-woo. He was grateful to himself that he did not throw away such a valuable item. He wrote a note to his daughter, saying that he was going for a walk and posted it on the refrigerator. Lee set off on a short trip. His target was a rift on Mount Guriong. The entrance was forbidden, and all passers-by were warned of the danger. The guy put on a mask and goggles. And then he jumped over the fence. He maneuvered quickly along the path. He had to hurry. Lee finally found the rift he needed, then went to the computer and confirmed his fake identity. This location belongs to rank AU, so Dojin received a warning about the difference in skill levels between the hunter and the rift. He reconfirmed his intention to go to the difficult dimension and then entered the location. He believed that killing 1 or 2 monsters would not attract too much attention, and it was a weekend, so he could do it quickly and go home to rest. Suddenly he heard a noise behind him, and 3 hunters entered the rift. The guys saw Dojin and were surprised to see him there. The situation became more complicated, and now the plan should be changed. Mira from the team called Lee a crazy bastard because he wasn't even wearing a suit. The guy next to him asked his colleague to speak quietly and not to attract too much attention. The hunters were trying to understand why this man entered such a large vault without a suit and weapons, and the guy with the glasses thought he was one of the crazy people who broadcast to such places. So he asked his colleague to talk to the weirdo in a nice way and send him home. Behind the man's back was a large sword. He said in a friendly manner that his name was Han Dong-yoon, and he was a member of the Magi Guild, and then asked the silent guy his name and guild. When Han didn't get an answer, he asked the masked guy if he had any idea where he was. Dojin replied that he understood everything perfectly well. Do-yoon asked with disbelief whether the stranger was really a hunter, since only a madman would enter such a large rift without any equipment, which is the same thing as committing suicide. A calm Lee thanked us for the experience, and said that he planned to catch a few monsters and leave the rift. After that, he said goodbye, and the confused hunters could not believe that the stranger opposite did not realize the seriousness of this location. Suddenly, they felt incredible pressure. Even Lee Dojun didn't realize what was happening. The rift became distorted and the ogre leader was making his appearance. Due to its appearance, control of the rift entrance can only be regained after the ogre leader is defeated. The rift will open once again if all participants within the rift die. Panic began to spread among the hunters, and one of them asked the team to turn on the emergency video button. Meanwhile, Jung Young-kul, the director of the Hunters Bureau, also received a notification about the emergency condition of one of the rifts. His colleague informed the boss that a check of the location revealed the presence of 4 hunters. 3 of them are rank hunters from the Magi Guild. The last guy is just an F-rank newbie. The director was surprised to see such a crazy rookie there. Checking the information, he found out that his name was Kim Hyun-woo. The emergency cameras have no sound, but the Bureau's employees were sure that the hunters had found the enemy's trail and were going to destroy the monsters. A colleague of the director said that the members of the Magi Guild are considered to be among the strongest among the A-ranked hunters, and they are well equipped, so if they are lucky, they will survive. Jung asked, who acts as the boss of the monsters, and the man replied that it was the king of the ogres. Sweat beaded on the director's face. He said with a serious face that they could hardly cope with such an opponent, so they should go to the meeting room immediately. Meanwhile, the captain was panicking and giving commands to his comrades. They ran non-stop and used acceleration potions. Mira was ordered to use her skill and report the location of the monsters. Lee Do-jun just ran after the others. The team captain was confident that Mira was an outstanding fighter who could spot the enemy within a radius of 1 kilometer, while Jung-ho was one of the most powerful healers he knew. By the way, the team captain himself had never lost a battle before, but the situation still caused him concern. He tried to calm himself down, thinking that they were strong enough to win, so they should just keep going as they were. Do-jun distracted the team captain and said that they were going in a different direction, so he would just take his leave first. Surprised by these words, the captain called the stranger crazy and asked him to be quiet and follow them further if he did not want to die. He threatened to kill the guy in the mask and glasses himself if he continued to talk nonsense. Lee was surprised by such restless and aggressive behavior. Jung-ho, with a smile on his face, apologized for his colleague and said that he was actually a very kind person. His behavior was due to the excitement of a tough fight. The girl was less positive and asked what their chances of survival were, since the ogre leader seems to be an S-rated monster. The captain asked his colleague not to think about nonsense and to focus on the task of locating the monsters. After that, the guy asked the team to stop for a minute. There was one dark ogre standing in their way, and the captain suggested that they eliminate the monster and run on. He turned to Mira and asked her to check if there were any other monsters within the range of her skill, and the girl started scanning. After that, the captain ordered his colleagues to cover him from monsters that could attack from the back. The guy planned to destroy the enemy that stood in their way himself. After that, he turned uneasily to the stranger and asked him not to do anything stupid and not to interfere. Jung-ho was ready to start the task, but suddenly she asked her colleagues to stop and said that she felt something was wrong. Using her skill, she saw that all the monsters were heading in the same direction, which was going to be a big problem, because all the enemies are going straight to the leader of ogres. Do-jun sat down on the ground and put his hands on his knees. He knew that it would be difficult. The biggest problem was that he was forced to remain incognito, and he didn't use any special equipment. He watched the movements of the enemies and saw that there were already 20 ogres amassing towards the ogre leader, and more were also coming. The girl covered her nose and angrily asked Jung-ho if he had just farted. The guy replied that he was too nervous at that moment. Looking at the weirdos, Lee concluded that his fellow travelers were unlikely to last long. Getting up from the ground, he thought that he was very unlucky, and really had no desire to do anything. But there was no other choice. Suddenly, the guy was stopped by the hand of one of the hunters. The captain repeated his request to stand still in an angry tone. He was worried that the stranger's behavior could ruin their plan. Do-jun asked to hear him out, but the angry man threatened him with death. Lee Do-jun didn't want to make any noise, so he laid down near the bushes and decided to let the hunters take their course of action. Picking up his huge sword, the captain of the small team said that in case of a gradual accumulation of enemies in one place, they should not wait. He plans to destroy the enemies one by one, after which Mira will use her sniper skills. The guy ordered the team to proceed with the plan. The soldiers took up positions around one of the dark ogres. The enemy began to roar like a beast. The captain closed the distance to the enemy, and then struck with his huge sword. But after the attack, a frightened look of surprise appeared on his face. Ogre caught his sword with ease. He was clutching the blade of the hunter's weapon with his hand. But the team wasted no time, and the sniper's arrows came into play, and the two hunters launched a surprise attack. Ogre did not have time to block the shots from different sides. Jung-ho continued to fire at the target. Then he asked Dong-yoon to hurry up. The captain seized the moment and freed his weapon from the enemy's hands. He wanted to end this fight as soon as possible and struck at the monster's legs. Ogre screamed out loud in pain, and then fell to his knees. Jumping high, the team captain swung at the enemy, and then stabbed him in the back with his sword. After this attack, Ogre fell to the ground. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, the captain praised the team and asked where the next enemy was. Mira replied that he was not far away. Dong-hyun decided not to waste time and attack the next enemy. Suddenly, a confused Jung-ho shouted that the stranger had disappeared, and the team was in a stupor. Angry Dong-hyun shouted that this stranger was a crazy asshole. Meanwhile, Dojun was not standing still. He easily killed 3 enemies in a flash, while the team of strong hunters needed a lot of time and effort. The guy started to fulfill his goal and began to mine mana crystals. He found the item he needed. 3 crystals were enough for him, but he still could not return home freely. Putting his backpack on his back, Lee realized that he had no other choice, and he needed to catch the ogre leader. But then he remembered what the angry hunter had said. So he relaxed on the ground and decided that he shouldn't rush. It would be better to let the arrogant Dong-yoon take care of this problem. Meanwhile, the hunters' hard fights continued. The team captain climbed on the neck of the dark ogre and tried to overcome it. Mira, in support of Mira, fired at the enemy from a distance. After their joint efforts, they finally eliminated another enemy. Jung-ho sat down on the ground tiredly. Mira said that these ogres were quite strong opponents. The exhausted girl couldn't understand why the dark ogres were gathering together. Raising his head, Dong-hyun thought that they were in a difficult position. Having only killed 11 enemy soldiers, they had lost most of their strength. He thought that it would be a good idea to kill the enemy leader right away. But the furious man doubted that even then they would have had any trouble escaping. The captain was distracted by Jung-ho's scream, and fear appeared on the man's face. The exhausted hunters were being approached by a crowd of enemies, including the ogre's leader. Dong-hyun couldn't understand how their enemies had managed to get so close to them without being noticed. But there was no time to think about it, so they simply assumed a fighting stance. The captain asked the team to be careful and keep their distance to take turns killing the enemy. But that was all he could say. He knew in his mind that the situation was hopeless, and it was over. Despair distracted the hunters from the battle. Jung-ho missed a powerful punch from the dark ogre and flew backwards into a tree behind him. No one had time to react, and the worried captain only shouted his comrade's name. Meanwhile, the enemy leader wasted no time in shouting something to his men. With a confused look, the girl remembered that today's breakfast had been unusually tasty. Perhaps this was her last day of life. Taking a step forward, Dong-yoon turned to Mira and asked her to run away, but the girl replied with a smile that it was impossible as she had no strength left, even to run away from the battlefield. The captain angrily said that this was an order and asked to take his wounded comrade with him. He said that he would leave them the rest, and with that, he launched a desperate attack. The dark orgs responded with an animalistic scream. The exhausted hunter approached his enemies, when suddenly the orgs received a series of serious and incredibly fast blows. The guy watched in amazement and could not understand what had happened. He didn't have time to do anything. While his comrades could barely move, Dong-yoon heard a soft step next to him, and the same stranger appeared in front of him. The captain realized with a startled surprise that it was the work of a masked man. Dojun created a barrier and asked the hunter to stay within its range. The guy guessed that such a technique was needed for protection. Looking around, he was shocked by the size of the barrier. He did not understand how it was possible to create such a thing. One of the enemies tried to strike the masked man. Lee calmly held an ordinary small tree branch in his hand, then calmly threw it at the ogre and destroyed half of the enemy's body. The exhausted hunters did not realize what had happened. Mira thought that their enemies had the ability to explode. One guy stood in front of a crowd of ogres, including their leader. He decided that he should do a good job, so he took out his legendary item. He threw the legendary sword into the air. The item began to release its true hidden power, and an incredible amount of energy was concentrated under the barrier, and the hunters ducked to the ground. Dongyun shouted through the noise to his comrades that he did not understand the origin of the thunder. Mira, who was covering her ears, replied that it was hardly thunder, while Jung-ho could not stand it. The pressure on the fighters was getting stronger. Calm Lee controlled the incredible power with confident movements of one hand. He again struck many lightning-fast blows at the enemy crowd. The captain was incredibly surprised to find out that it was one of the sword techniques. Meanwhile, the ogre leader, with fear on his face, tried to shield himself with his hands from the attack. But he was instantly struck with many powerful blows. The blades cut through the enemies one by one. In the end, Dujon caught his legendary sword without any further movement. The battle was over and the enormous enemy leader was destroyed. After that, the rift returned to its normal state. Lee sighed and said he could finally go home. The hunters couldn't believe that it was over, and they had managed to survive. They were on the verge of defeat. The surprised captain approached the stranger and asked how he managed to do it. Crawling in the body of the ogre, Lee Dojun replied that he did not need complications. So he gave Dongyun the glory for eliminating the enemy leader. The captain could not believe what he was hearing. Putting another monocrystal in his briefcase, Lee assured the hunter that it was in his best interest, so his reputation would be better. Dongyun tried to object, but the masked stranger said that their silence would repay him for saving him. The hunter tried to say something, but the mysterious stranger quickly disappeared from his sight. The confused team still couldn't believe that it had really happened. Then the cheerful Mira said they should have taken the stranger's business card. But the team leader behaved rudely, and because of him, they will not meet again. Meanwhile, in the bureau of the hunting academy, they were watching the situation, and the confused men did not know how to describe what they had seen. The nervous director Zhang Yongkul asked a colleague to bring back the camera footage before the monsters appeared. The exhausted team met the enemies, including the S-rank monster, the leader of ogres. At this point in the video, the captain tried to support the team. The director watched the video carefully, and then asked for a pause. He was interested in the stranger's object. He guessed that the weapon was a sword, but he was concerned that the physical form of the weapon was only the hilt, so he asked to rewind again. At that moment, the team did not understand what was happening. The hunters could not cope with the incredible pressure in the area of the legendary object. A colleague of the director said that all the video recordings of the emergency cameras were cut off at this very moment. The director asked the name of the stranger, and was told that he had entered the rift with a temporary pass named Kim Hein-woo. The colleague was very confused, because the bureau had no access to any information about the mysterious hunter. All of his information in the pass was falsified, so they had no idea who he was. Even the date of birth was incorrect, but this did not prevent the man from passing the hunter identification. It has been appraised to be a C-rank place, and since Miss Yeji just recently became a same-level hunter, it will be a good opportunity to check it out. This assignment is an order from the boss of their office, so don't be offended by it. With a smile, Dojun replied that he was actually pleased to be entrusted with such a serious task. Hyuksu decided to compliment his co-worker and told him that he has been doing a great job lately. Lee thanked him for the compliment and said that he should work harder for better results. While making tea in the office kitchen, Hyuk-soo told his colleague that he could always count on his friends to help him. Their friendly conversation was interrupted by a panicked apology from a girl with shortness of breath. Yeji was ashamed that she was late for work. Hyuk-soo, who was worried about the sight, replied that she could stay at home on weekdays. It was normal and provided for by the office rules. Suddenly, the office boss interrupted the conversation and asked his colleague not to be so rude, as Yeji is their precious employee, and they are always happy to have her around. Disturbed by the boss's words, Senior Hyuk-soo decided to greet his colleague again and said that he was glad to see her at any time. The smiling girl thanked him for the offer. Dojun asked his colleague if they had a lot of work today. He suddenly had plans to visit the new rift with Yeji, the hunter. The man replied that in that case, he should discuss the matter with the boss. But the boss interrupted the conversation and immediately agreed to give permission for the trip. And Yeji was pleased with his decision. However, he had one more request for his employee. He gave Lee some money and asked him to treat their valuable colleague to something tasty. The man was very proud that they had such a popular hunter in their office. The team went to the store. Yeji thanked him for the delicious snack. Dojun told her with a smile that after the exam and her promotion, the office staff began to treat her much better. The girl sincerely replied that she hadn't noticed. She thought that the attitude towards Lee had actually improved because he was different from the others in terms of his work performance. The guy thought about it. This option is also possible, and 150,000 won is a lot of money even for his boss. Although for Dojun, who had 200 million in his account, it was a drop in the bucket. After a pleasant rest, the guy suggested not to waste time and go to Rift. It was very close by. Many high-ranking hunters had already gathered around their place of work. The girl was surprised that information about the new location had spread so quickly among the guilds. There were even employees of the Bureau of Hunters among the crowd, and there were B-ranked hunters. The guy wondered why they chose this particular place to work. The girl explained that it is a common phenomenon when hunters choose easier jobs nowadays for their own safety. Dojun asked Yeji if she was worried. She replied that she was because it was her first time working at such a high-level location, and she realized that she was also responsible for her partner's safety. The last time she missed one of the enemies, and he approached her colleague, she promised herself that she would not make such a mistake again. The calm guy replied that she shouldn't worry because he was no slouch either. Returning to the manager, Yeji asked him to just run away if she was in danger. However, to her surprise, Lee Dojun replied that this would not happen, as the girl had demonstrated a high level of skills long before the certification. He saw how she could easily handle ogres, so with enough care, fighting against opponents of this level will not create any problems for her. He was convinced of this, and Yeji shouldn't worry either, and the girl, overwhelmed by the praise, simply thanked him shyly for his sincere words. Dojung saw that the other hunters were looking for teammates, but Yeji asked him not to rush. Recalling the recent events, he concluded that those 3 hunters from Magi Guild were a pretty good and balanced team. However, he couldn't praise their stupid nature and behavior. Meanwhile, Yeji had already changed into her new costume and wondered what her colleague was thinking. She was worried about why Dojun hadn't said anything. She was afraid that the new suit didn't suit her. The guy turned to Miss Yeji in a serious tone and said, "If you were to form a party, what type would you like?" He then listed the roles that different hunters could play on the same team. But the girl looked at him with resentment. She was expecting a different continuation of the conversation about the type of people. The guy noticed this offended look and asked what was wrong. The girl asked if it was really true that she was the only hunter Dojun worked with, and then jealously asked if he was planning to sign a contract with other hunters. Lee began to make excuses and said that even if he signed another contract with a hunter, his contract with Yeji would not be terminated. The girl turned to the manager in an angry tone, and then said with an offended face that she didn't want anyone else on the team. Turning away from the manager, she said that her only goal was to earn as much money as possible. After that, she asked Dojun not to stand still and to come with her. Meanwhile, Byun Daeseng from the Hunters Bureau Rift Control Team continued to pick his nose as before. The information he had received seemed like nonsense to him. It had been 2 days since the rift had appeared, but the hunters who had gone to investigate had not yet returned. The team that entered on the first day returned after 8 hours. After that, 32 hunters entered the rift, but it doesn't look like they are going to return. Usually it takes about 8 hours to visit such a location, and there is no food or places to rest in the rift. The weirdo thought about the fact that the hunters work hard inside without any rest. He decided to report this situation to the academy. However, after a moment, he wondered if it was worth it. He decided not to do any extra work. He was only a trainee, so it wasn't his responsibility. And it was almost time for rotation, so he was sure that the next guy would deal with this problem. He was distracted from his thoughts by a man's voice, Lee Do-jun, who introduced himself as an employee of the Seoul City Hall. He also introduced his partner, Yi-ji, and the confused intern said hello in return. He asked if they were also here to investigate the fault, and then confirmed their identity to allow them to enter the location. Suddenly, the man looked closer and noticed a familiar face. He asked the girl if she was the celebrity who had turned down the offer to join the Icarus Guild during the certification of hunters. The girl looked down and answered that it was indeed her. The man smiled uncomfortably and said they could start their work. Before entering the rift, Dojun told a co-worker that she was quite popular, and the lady said that such attention embarrassed her. Suddenly, the confused guy shouted to the team that he had forgotten to tell them some important details about the location. But before he could, Lee and Yeji had already entered the rift. Returning to his colleague, Lee said that the stranger was trying to tell them something. But they didn't care much. The manager logged into the rift management system and then registered the new location in the City Hall database. Dojun planned to start topographing the new rift. The surprised girl looked into the distance and noticed people, a group of unfamiliar hunters lying exhausted nearby. Some of them were very exhausted or even sick. They were exhausted and just waiting for help. The girl did not understand what had happened to them, and the manager suggested that she come over and find out. One of the men who had been there for a long time said that they had been joined by new victims of the situation, and then asked Dojun with a smile what he was doing in this place, since judging by Lee Dojun's appearance, he was not even a hunter. The man introduced himself as an employee of the Monster and Rift Research Department, and the hunter replied that he was familiar with how they work. Dojun asked what was going on and why the hunters were not returning. They had seen many wounded soldiers who needed to go back and get medical help. Pointing to the other people, the man replied that it's not that they don't want to leave the rift. They just don't have the opportunity. Dojun and Yiji looked around, and then the guy was surprised by what he saw. It turned out that the rift behind them had stopped. At first the manager thought it was a glitch, but then he realized that they couldn't have entered if it was. The girl answered that it was called the rift break. She said, larger rifts above B rank can become distorted, but in addition to that, all types of rifts can become a rift break. The guy thought that it is a strange phenomenon where certain rifts require a certain condition for it to be cleaned. The girl asked the exhausted hunter to share all the information he had received. The man showed his interface to the newcomers. It being said that Rift Break needs a 25 or more participants to have entered the rift for status being activated. They should clear every normal monster inside the location, and the perfect clear means every monster to be destroyed. There are also some penalties. Nobody can leave the rift during the break. The clearing reward is awarding all the hunters with upgrading their skill up to 5 points. Additional reward is a B rank or higher weapon for those who will defeat a boss or a champion monster. There are still 280 normal monsters left, and also 3 champions and a single boss alive. Yeji realized that it is quite a lot. Exhausted from trying to get through this rift, the man said that newcomers should also just stay and wait for the help of strong hunters. All those present have been in this place for 2 days, and they are waiting for the arrival of more skilled hunters from the academy. Lee suggested that they join forces to defeat the common monsters, but the man angrily replied that the manager had no idea who they were fighting. At first, they also thought that orcs would be their enemies. But when they entered the rift, they realized they were wrong. The team looked at the man in surprise, waiting for an answer as to who their real enemy was. The stranger said that if they went further, they would meet B-rank trolls. The surprised girl said that she was confident in her abilities to fight against orcs, but trolls were a different matter. With a smile on his face, the man agreed with her and said that this was the reason why they were just waiting for help. Yeji realized that trolls cannot be killed by light wounds. They have a fast regeneration skill, so they need to be dealt a fatal blow right away. And her biggest problem was that she could hardly fight such an enemy and protect her manager at the same time. The girl said she would go the other way. Meanwhile, the guy was sure that this was a great opportunity to get a new trophy weapon after eliminating the champions and the boss. He thought it was a great plan, so he asked the girl if she would agree to go hunting if he was safe. And Yeji said she didn't mind. She was surprised to turn back to a familiar voice. A team of 3 men in funny costumes greeted her: Park Sung-min, Choi Ho-jun, and Kang Tae-sung. The guy with the cap said with a smile that there would be no problems in the battle with the idea that it was a B-ranked rift. The man in the heavy armor suggested that they stick together so that the civil servant would definitely not be harmed by the enemies. They went on their way. Choi Ho-jun asked the manager why he went to such a place without any equipment. The guy kept checking the information on his tablet and did not answer. This surprised the polite hunter. The calm Dojin warned the hunter that an enemy was waiting for them in 30 meters ahead, so they should prepare for battle. Choi couldn't understand how the enemies got there, while Dojin received a notification that only 5% of the map had been formed. Choi Ho-jun prepared for battle, holding a large shield and a mace. The trolls took notice of him, and then rushed to attack. The girl noticed that the behavior of the enemies was unusual. 3 monsters attacked 1 hunter at once. Defending himself from the enemies, Choi warned his colleagues that these trolls were no ordinary monsters. He threw his opponent to his right. He had enough strength to send the troll flying with a blow from his shield. He asked his colleague to take care of the troll on their right. Park Sung-min, a long-range hunter, replied that he understood it all and took up his weapon. He created a mark next to the enemy, which reduced the troll's defense and increased its vulnerability to attack. After that, Park struck out. He easily hit the target and knocked it down. The troll caught one of the shots, but a moment later, many new marks appeared around him. Dojin turned to Mrs. Yeji with a serious face, and then ran to a safe distance and said that the enemy was near her. Behind the worried girl was a troll, and he struck out with a strong blow, but Sha Yeji had time to react to the unexpected attack and dodged it. Choi apologized for his mistake. The girl was frightened to think that her manager could have been hit by such a blow. The girl looked down in anger, and then shouted threateningly that she would destroy all her enemies. The girl clutched her old sword in her hands with anger. Then she went into battle. Her eyes were full of confidence and a desire to destroy the enemy. Yeji approached her enemy. The troll did not expect the girl to be so fast. Yeji immediately struck several blows at the enemy's body, and the troll immediately jumped back to safety. He began to regenerate quickly. However, the pain made him realize that Yeji was not an easy opponent. There was rage in his eyes, and a moment later he roared like an animal. Dojin watched this quite calmly. But not understanding the situation, the hunters wondered what happened to the enemy. Choi started to look around. He began to realize what was happening. He realized that he was right. The troll had actually called other monsters for help. And there were a lot of them. And the crowd was really scaring the hunters. The girl watched this without any emotion. She had remained serious since her manager had almost been hit by the troll. She counted 9 monsters, and then she shouted with determination that she would not let any of them live. Park turned in surprise at her voice, and then stopped his frightened comrades. They thought that Yeji must have gone crazy, as she stood confidently in anticipation of the approaching crowd of strong enemies. The team looked at this in amazement. Choi said they should go back, otherwise they would all die here. Suddenly, Park noticed something unusual. He realized what it was. He could see the aura of the girl's sword. Dojin was sitting safely behind a rock, not far from the scene. He watched what was happening and noticed the changes in the girl's weapon. He called it a refined sword, but in his opinion, it was still weak. Choi shouted to the team that the aura of the girl's sword didn't matter now. There were many monsters around them that they had no chance of winning against. Motivated by what he saw, Park ran into the battle and asked his colleagues to join him. The crowd of trolls was getting closer. They were ready to attack the hunters. Yeji assumed the fighting stance of a swordsman. Her serious, killing stare caused fear. She ducked down to meet the crowd of enemies, and the battle began. Watching this, the 2 hunters thought she had gone mad. So they decided to cover their colleague. Meanwhile, in the real world, Yoonhee was alone in her apartment. She thoughtfully prepared many delicious meals for her kind father, after which she decided to start cleaning the apartment. The girl vacuumed the surfaces, sorted out the laundry, and then decided to clean her father's room. She started vacuuming, and then noticed the photos next to his desk. There were unusual books nearby, but nothing could have surprised her. Lee had suffered so much from amnesia that he had only recently learned how to use hot water. She was holding a book about 50 ways to be a good parent, which didn't really surprise her. Her father was very caring. He studied the book in detail and emphasized many details. The girl realized that she should be the best daughter accordingly. She decided to try her best and finish school, and then earn enough money to pay her father back 20 times more than he had spent on her. While cleaning her room, she noticed a garbage bag under the table. But there was something hard in the bag. She didn't know what it was and decided to check the contents. She took out one of the mana crystals from her father's bag. She was sure that it was the magic item she was thinking of. She was very surprised and thought that it could not be in the garbage bag, so in her opinion, the stone just fell out of the desk drawer. But when she opened the drawer, she was even more surprised. She didn't know what to say after what she saw, and she screamed in surprise. This discovery was a shock to her. So she followed her father's example and lay down with the jewelry. She had no idea how much the 9 crystals were worth. Then she found a strange metal thing. She thought it was some kind of garbage, and even thought she should throw it away. The next thing she found was a fake hunter's pass, and her father's secret was out. Meanwhile, Yeji continued to fight desperately, and she struck many blows at her enemies. But she could barely keep up with the attacks of all the trolls. Her reaction was enough to dodge them. She jumped back to a safe distance, and then took up a fighting stance again. One of the trolls immediately attacked. The girl continued to fight, while Park was careless and fell under the troll's hand. The guy tried to save himself and shouted to his colleague that he urgently needed help. Choi looked worriedly in the direction of the idiot who was struggling against the troll wounded by the girl. The team of hunters did not understand why the enemies were so strong. The 3 of them were trying to deal with the troll. The girl was doing her best and realized that she had little strength left. There were other enemies in front of her. She started to think that it was over, and then she remembered that her manager was somewhere nearby. She gripped her sword tightly, thinking that she could not lose. She shouted that she would never give up and ran to attack. She jumped high into the air, and then she struck out with a strong punch. The frightened troll was able to block the attack with his hand. Meanwhile, the other monster quickly approached the girl. She realized that she had been inattentive, and because of her mistake, the enemy got too close. Suddenly, the troll stopped and started shaking. His eyes were filled with fear. He fell to the ground in front of the surprised girl. Manager Dojin stood there with his hand outstretched. He was annoyed that he had to intervene in the fight, but otherwise the team would not have been able to cope. The hunters continued to ruthlessly destroy the troll in all possible ways, while the exhausted girl fell to the ground. She thought she was very lucky at the moment when one of the enemies froze. The manager came up to the girl and asked if she was okay. She replied with a smile that she was fine and not injured in the battle. The guy replied that this was great, but they should still take a break to rest before continuing on their way. And the other soldiers also thought it was a great idea. After 2 hours of rest, the hunters returned to their task. Sho was surprised at how quickly the statistics changed. He was beginning to believe that they could manage to stop the rift. In addition, Yeji looked very confident in his eyes. He had heard that she was a C rank. But with this kind of success, a new S-ranked hunter might be coming up before his eyes. This explained why the cunning Park was always hanging around her. The guy asked what she was planning to do after work and suggested a dinner together. But the girl decided to avoid continuing the conversation and said that she had a lot of urgent things to do. Shui interrupted their conversation and suggested that they celebrate their upcoming victory over the trolls together, as they continue to fight only through joint efforts. The guy who had been courting Yeji didn't like his friend's suggestion. Meanwhile, Dojin stood apart and checked the latest information on his tablet. During his stay in the rift, the map of the area was 60% complete, and he told the team that at this rate, they would complete the process by the end of the day. In addition, he realized that this situation was also beneficial for his partner, Ms. Sha Yeji, as she had significantly improved her skills and her maximum mana had doubled. He wondered how many levels she had risen to that day. Dojin was sure that she had made a lot of progress. This rift was a great training for her. The manager turned to the hunters and said they should get ready for battle. Choi replied that they wanted to rest a little more, but Lee replied that in 200 meters, they would meet a very strong enemy. A few minutes passed, and the team realized what they were talking about. A giant monster with 3 heads came out to meet them. The team began to discuss the type of enemy. They believed it was also a troll. Yeji expected a difficult battle with the new monster. The creature with 3 heads began to growl aggressively like an animal. And then mana began to gather from the mouth of each head in the shape of 3 spheres. The monster struck a powerful blow in the girl's direction. She was shocked by the sudden, lightning-fast attack. The manager became more serious. He realized that the enemy was quite strong, and Yeji would not be able to withstand such a powerful blow. He immediately decided to join the fight, and stood right in front of the girl. A powerful punch hit the man and created a huge cloud of dust around him. The frightened girl hid from the sand around her, and then realized what had happened. She remembered that Mr. Lee had appeared right in front of her a moment before the impact. She started looking around for her colleague and shouting his name. The hunting team barely had time to hide from the attack. They started looking around and asked if anyone was hurt. Choi pinned Park to the ground and asked her to keep her head down. One blow from such a strong monster was enough to destroy any of them. The distraught girl was screaming to the manager, asking him to answer. She didn't know where he was or what had happened. Suddenly, surprise appeared on her face. She found her colleague sitting next to a large stone, exhausted. She ran up to the manager and asked if he was okay. She was worried for his life and asked him to wake up. The team of hunters panicked and tried to save the girl. Park shouted that it was dangerous here, and Yeji should find a better place. The furious girl thought her friend was not breathing. She held his head, and then tearfully apologized for not being able to protect him. She hugged her precious friend despite all the chaos around her. The troll continued to make many attacks. Park watched his colleague's behavior. He realized that this was the end of her and ran in her direction to help. Choi said that he was doing something stupid, but the determined guy just asked him to help him. He believed that the troll needed time before the next attack, so they had a chance to get closer to the enemy. He believed that this was the only way to defeat such a strong monster. The team had no choice but to join their colleague. Choi said he would attack from the front and asked his colleagues to approach the troll from the right side. The fearless hunter got close to the monster, but the troll was already ready to strike. The troll struck a powerful blow right at the hunter. A moment later, the enemy received several shots. He was about to go to the manager, but his friend caught him by the arm, and then asked his friend to heal his wounds first. In the meantime, the cunning Dojun opened one eye and began to cautiously observe the situation. He was surprised to see a strange interface notification about getting a new master status, and looking at his partner, he thought that she had become at least twice as strong in this rift. The manager had no choice but to bide his time. He couldn't show himself now, as everyone thought he was seriously wounded and couldn't come to his senses. Dojun was alone, just building pyramids from the stones lying under his feet. The battle continued, and the troll kept making noise. The girl was in control of the situation and followed every attack of the monster. She dodged the enemy's mana shots. But the troll had one more trick he hadn't revealed before. He shot fire in the girl's direction, and she barely managed to dodge and jump away from the enemy's attack radius. She was furious that all her efforts were in vain. But she immediately realized that she could not lose concentration. The enemy continued to attack at close range and had already raised his leg right above the girl, when suddenly the troll received several shots in the back. The girl had a support group. Park shouted that he would help and continue to fire on the enemy's back so it would be easier for her to continue the fight. The guy was so motivated to be useful to the pretty lady that he easily dodged enemy attacks. The troll showed the girl his back, and she took it as a great chance to strike a decisive blow. The girl quickly closed the distance and launched an attack, and the enemy screamed in pain. But his wounds were not significant, and he tried to counterattack. The girl jumped back to a safe distance, and then decided to change her plan. She took a fencing stance and held her sword out in front of her in the direction of the enemy. And then she lunged and stabbed him in the body with her sword. She ended up behind the enemy's back. Meanwhile, her friend Park continued to fire at the troll's back. The girl seized the moment and attacked again with many blows. They constantly alternated their attacks. The troll did not know which of the hunters to attack. He tried to strike Yeji. However, the girl managed to dodge and kick back. She knocked out two of her opponent's teeth. The extremely strong monster stood on one knee, and then the girl struck the next blow to its body. Exhausted by the long battle and the large number of wounds, the monster fell on its back. The girl looked at the result of her hard work, and then climbed on top of the troll, and held out her sword, saying that this was definitely the end of their fight. Yeji delivered the final blow and ended the long battle. Her coworker Park breathed a sigh of relief. Then he fell to the ground and exhaustedly said that they finally made it. Choi agreed and said that he almost died because of him and barely survived in the end. Dojun watched the end of the fight without a word. He thought that his partner had really improved her sword skills, but she still had a lot to learn. Among the consequences of the fight was a bad event. His entire jacket was full of holes, and he would have to buy a new suit right after the fight. He thought about his daughter's reaction. She would definitely think he was being bullied at work and offer to deal with the offenders. Pouring sand out of his boots, he thought that Yunhee's overprotective nature could be a problem. The healer turned and looked towards the manager. In his opinion, he was perfectly fine and looked much better than the others. After he said that, the girl immediately turned towards her friend. She was surprised that her partner was already on his feet and ran to meet Lee Do-jun. She hugged her colleague. Lee felt uncomfortable. Park was clearly not satisfied with this reward for the hard-fought battle and self-sacrifice, and he looked at his hugging colleagues with resentment. Kang approached the office manager and asked him how he had managed to survive a direct hit of such incredible force, and he replied that he did not understand it himself. The exhausted Choi continued to complain about life. He said he thought he was already dead. He felt as if this fight had taken 100 years of his life. The healer approached Do-jun and said that he would still try to heal his friend. But to his bewildered surprise, he failed. Lee began to avoid all his attempts to use his own healing skill on his friend. He looked at his own hands, which were shaking from the battle, and realized that his skill did not work. The surprised girl asked her friend if he was really not wounded anywhere, and Do-jun replied that he thought it was true. Completely disappointed, Park said that it didn't matter. The main thing was that they had managed to survive. Approaching the manager, Choi suggested that they stop researching the rift at this point, as the fighting had exhausted them. Do-jun agreed and said that this was indeed the best option. They started discussing how they would divide the loot, and they all agreed to do it equally. But Do-jun couldn't join them because the law doesn't allow him to enrich himself in this way. Choi smiled and agreed with him because in any case, such conditions were very favorable. The surprised captain of the hunters' team asked if this applied only to him as an employee of the government office, and Do-jun replied that it did, but asked in return that the hunters perform one favor for him. The hunters were excited by this request and asked what kind of favor he had just mentioned. Do-jun simply pointed his finger toward the target. He wanted the trophy for defeating a special enemy to go to Miss Yeji. The two men looked at each other. Choi replied with a smile that there was no problem with that, since defeating the troll was mostly the girl's fault. Yeji took the high-level trophy sword with a satisfied shine in her eyes and thanked her comrades. Park returned to his courtship and praised the girl for her efforts, and said that she and the trophy item looked great. The girl was uncomfortable with his words and just laughed. Suddenly, Do-jun felt a familiar presence nearby and turned around. Two hunters with good equipment approached them. They were the famous heroes Kang Min-hyuk and Han Min-ji, and the girl greeted the hunters with a smile. With a serious face, Kang said that he did not expect to see Miss Cha Yiji and her manager Mr. Lee Do-jun in such a place. He turned around and saw a high-level monster lying on its back. He walked over to the defeated monster and said that it looked like Miss Yeji had gotten much stronger. The shy girl thanked the celebrity for the compliment. The cunning manager said that it was all thanks to her costume that Kang gave her, which made the guy angry, and he accepted that he had lost the bet. Minji realized that the dialogue had become tense and said that it was time for them to move on. Kang immediately turned away from the hunters and said that they would continue the conversation later, but now they had serious business to attend to and would leave first. The nice girl said that Yeji still has the option to break his contract with the city hall and join their Icarus Guild, and she said she was very welcome. The boy turned to Miss Minji with a serious look, and then tore up the girl's invitation and said that he was just a human being like the others. He believed that Han expected to hear these words, but Lee didn't care about the opinions of others, and for him, Yeji is not a subject for exchange. She is the only one who can make decisions about the transfer. The hunters' team was shocked by the manager's behavior. They thought he was crazy for doing such a thing. Do-jun said that he didn't care what others thought. Only Miss Yeji had the right to make the decision. The confused Minji realized that her plan was ruined. After that, the angry boyfriend asked her to do him a favor and not to ask him about the transfer anymore. He considered these conversations very offensive to the dignity of a hunter.